You know, another plant that has pigments that we see commonly all around our house, but we never think much about it? Grass. Grass. Notice grass is green. We don't have red lawns. We don't have orange lawns. We don't have purple lawns. Actually, that would be sort of cool, wouldn't it? But no, we have green because primarily... Hi, welcome to Evidence for Faith. It's your host, Michael Lane. We're coming to you right here in the forest. It's in the fall time. As you can tell by the background around me here, we're looking at trees, how they're changing colors. Have you ever wondered why trees change colors? And why do they have like reds, yellows? Why are they green in the summer and they're maybe brown in the fall? Why do they even fall out of the tree onto the ground? What happens to them when they fall on the ground? Why do they turn this brownish color? A lot of cool questions that are here, interesting questions. And the thing is, there's an answer to this, all found in God's creation. God designed all of this so perfectly. And the thing is, it all deals with keeping life on this planet, because it deals with a process called photosynthesis. And we're going to be talking about in this lesson, looking at different trees, explaining why they have different colors, and answering some of these really interesting questions. So the next time you go walking through the forest yourself and you see some beautiful trees with gorgeous colors of orange, red, yellows, browns, you'll be able to understand a little bit better why God did it this way and how can that impact me in my spiritual life. So join us as we take a look at the pigments in trees and the coloration of the leaves. We're standing here looking out, and right across from us there's some birch and poplar trees that are in this area through here. And you'll notice they haven't always all changed yet. Many of their leaves are still greenish in color. Now, why do we have the greens? And you can see yellows, and maybe down below you'll see some reds, and you'll see browns, et cetera, et cetera. Why all these different colors? Where were they at? Well, believe it or not, most of these colors, not all, the reds in particular, were not there all the time throughout the summer, but the yellows, the oranges, those kind of colors, the brown, they're there. You just can't see them because there's so much of another pigment there. It's called chlorophyll. Now, there's different types of chlorophyll. All plants and algae have chlorophyll, what we call A and B. How more technical can you get than that? So chlorophyll A and B. It just so happens both the color, the pigment of chlorophyll A and B are both green. Now, chlorophyll, you might recall from your days in high school, that chlorophyll is the pigment that is necessary for photosynthesis. So what happens is they're getting water from the root systems down below, and the water is being transported through xylem with the minerals up to the leaves. The leaves are factories, or what they are. They're factories producing photosynthesis. And what they do is the chlorophyll absorbs the sunlight, the energy from the sunlight, and what they do is take in this water and using sunlight in this beautiful design that God has made, showing his existence and his intelligence in here, and it makes a conversion into sugars, C6H12O6, glucose. And some of them, these sugars build up inside these leaves. Others, they'll form fruits on certain trees. They send the sugars down into the roots to be stored. Maple trees are very famous for that, sugar maple in particular. These birch do this also. They send the excess sugars that they make in the summertime, this chlorophyll A and B, and they send it down. But the thing is, there's so much chlorophyll A and B, you can't see anything else in here. But chlorophyll's got a weakness too, actually. It's a very unstable molecule. Trees have to keep making it because it doesn't last long and it breaks down easily. It's very sensitive to temperature. It's very sensitive to the amount of light. The less light, it's not going to be able to function. The temperature gets cooler, there's nothing to help it. And so it's like losing its energy and losing its ability to photosynthesize. So what eventually happens is you look at some of these trees, particularly the ones that are just totally yellow and orange, what's happened is the chlorophyll A and B has been broken down. It's degraded and you can't see it anymore. So what's left over? Well, we see yellow, we see orange. Orange we see in a lot of plants like pumpkins and carrots and things. These are carotenoids, and they are present inside these leaves all the time. The yellows are a chemical, a pigment that's called xanthophyll, or fucoxanthin. Some of them have that, but it's these xanthophylls that are in these leaves all the same time. Yes, in the summertime you'd never notice it because everything looks green. But when the chlorophyll A dies off, you start to see this. Now, what is going on to make them do this? Chlorophyll A and B, as I say, is very unstable. As the temperatures drop here in the fall, and the light is getting shorter, if you've noticed in the daytime here, we're getting less light, more darkness at night, the chlorophyll starts to break down. The trees have been designed, this is not random chance, it's designed that where the leaf of the chlorophyll is attached, it starts to seal off, because these are deciduous leaves. They're very thin, they will leach out water vapor very easily. So God has designed these trees to conserve water so that they can go through the winter. So they drop these leaves eventually, but in the process, they first of all cut off the leaf from the little twig that's holding it, the petiole that's holding it. A little layer of cork forms that seals off the xylem and the phloem. So the leaf is sitting there by itself now. If it's possible, it will try to generate sugars in its last bit effort. But as the chlorophyll starts to degrade, it starts to become colorless, the other pigments now start to appear. These birch trees that we see here and these poplars, the yellow color we see, like I say, they're xanthophylls, but there's a special thing called lutein. And these birch trees have them all summer long. Lutein and flavonoids they're just pigmented as yellow. That's their color. So when the green disappears, we see those colors standing out. So they're very, very well known, birch and poplar and trees like this, making this beautiful bright yellow. And maple trees have this also. That yellow pigment, what its job primarily was to help absorb sun's energy and give energy to the chlorophyll in a process to help it photosynthesize. So they're accessory pigments, or what we call them, and they help the chlorophyll to get the energy to do the photosynthesis. You don't see them in the summertime because unless you're seeing a leaf that's dying, the chlorophyll being very unstable, it dies off or breaks down very easily. Then you see the yellow colors or the orange colors and others shine through. So in some of these leaves, their chlorophyll, you can see down here below and stuff, you can see that there's just yellow leaves. The chlorophyll A and B are gone. It's been degraded. So now you're getting this beautiful show of the yellows. Birch are very famous for having this bright yellow color. Maples, sugar maples in particular, will have an orange color because they do something a little different. Over in this direction, you see a maple tree, and you'll see the orange. That's carotenoid. Carotenoid comes on a little later. It becomes visible a little bit later. The flavonoids, the xanthophyll, they come out very easily, and you can see the yellows. If you ever watch the progression of the colors, the green disappears, the yellows are there first. Then it seems mostly that the orange comes out because it takes a little longer for all the chemicals, the pigments to disappear and let them really shine. But you notice the red colorations that we see. That is anthocyanin. Many fruits have anthocyanins, like apples, red apples, and other things that are deep red, anthocyanins. They're very healthy for us. They're very, very good for our bodies, and God gave it to us in abundance. That, as I said, is not present in the leaf during the summertime. That happens after the green pigment A and B chlorophylls. They have degraded. What happens? There's sugar stuck in the leaf. It's been sealed off, but there's sugar in there. Since the chlorophyll A and B can't do its work, the last bit effort of the tree was to try and make these anthocyanins, because they're necessary pigments also for these trees. One of the things we believe, we're not absolutely certain on this, but biologists believe that the anthocyanins, what they do is they act sort of like as a sunscreen to try to protect what's left of the chlorophyll. It's an idea, and it seems to have some scientific basis. But it is being produced now. And these trees that you see here, these maples here, you can see the bright red coloration, and red maples are very well known for the beautiful deep red color. That comes at the end. As the leaf is being sealed off, it's stuck with sugar in there. The sugar is being converted into this, but eventually what happens, we know, the leaves will turn brown or whatever, they fall to the ground. As we're walking through the forest and along this rail, I just had to notice something off to the side that caught my attention. There's some beautiful bright red berries down here. Might be something like, I'm not sure what they are. I think they're called something like a Solomon's plume or something, but they're bright red berries. Now, the point I want to make here is the color. This whole lesson's dealing with pigments. Notice the red berries. Yet right here is another plant, and it's got purple berries. Now, here's what's interesting. Both these are being colored by the same chemical, and it's one of the pigments we talked about, anthocyanins. Anthocyanins give us red, they give us the purples, they give us the color of blackberries, the color of plums, and all these things. And the thing is, it has to do with sunlight somewhat, but also it changes the color of the fruits. The fruits are that color due to the pH, the acidity of the plant. The pH, anthocyanins can be used to actually indicate if you have something that's an acid or a base, because they will change colors with that. So the reason that these are two different colors is because their pH is slightly different. And it has the same thing with petals of flowers too. They found out many years ago, back in the 1800s, that you could use petals of flowers as an indicator for an acid or a base. Try it sometime with a drop of vinegar or a drop of ammonia or something. Try different pigments like that and see what happens. And blueberries are very famous for having such a high amount of anthocyanins, and when the sun hits them, they turn bright, bright bluish purple color, very high. Also blackberries, very high in many of the anthocyanins. And the red coloration and stuff that we see, it's just showing that there's a different pH in it. Different type of plant producing a different pH in the sap, because anthocyanins are primarily found in the sap and the liquid parts of the plant. They're water soluble. If you've ever noticed, at the very end, the oaks are usually up in the north woods around here. They're like the last trees to give up their leaves. They don't have this type of coloration. No, they just don't have it. They're not as pretty. Also, they like to put on their own little show at the end, and they turn more of a rusty brown color. And eventually, they will fall, and some oaks will hold on to their leaves pretty much through the winter, where the others, these factories have done their job. They can no longer function. And God has set up the most beautiful recycling system, because the leaves, when they fall to the ground, break down fungi, bacteria, and things, help break them down to their molecular components, and it goes back into the soil, which the tree will then use in the future as a food source. The minerals come back. So it's a recycling. Another thing about these brown leaves, in the spring, as you walk around, or even in the fall, you walk around, you see a lot of brown leaves. Mostly oaks are just a dark brown. I get asked many times, why are these leaves brown? Where's the brown coming from? Well, chlorophyll, which we talked about before, chlorophyll A and B, they have iron in their molecular structure. The iron, yes, iron molecules are in there. They break down, the chlorophyll A and B breaks down, and as it does this, the iron's sort of left over. So you'll notice throughout the winter, into the next spring, you're walking around, you see dead leaves everywhere, and what color are they? They're brown. The reason they're brown? Iron content. Because all these leaves had iron in their chlorophyll A and B. The oaks show it the most because they don't have as many of these other accessory pigments, but that's why they appear so brown. Another type of pigment that we find commonly in many, many trees, and it's just not in trees, it's in a lot of fruits and stuff, is a thing called tannin. Tannin is very common with oak trees. I'm standing here with an oak that's going through. As you can see, the color changes at this time of year. And the oak during the summertime appears nice and dark green because of the chlorophyll A and B. But as we've already talked about, chlorophyll A and B is a very unstable molecule. It doesn't handle cold. It doesn't handle long periods of darkness. If it gets too bright, it decomposes. If it's too dark, it doesn't, the plant can't make enough of it. So it's a chemical pigments. These chlorophyll A and B are constantly being made all summer long. And the thing is, this tree is still having a lot of chlorophyll A and B in it because you can see the green color. You also notice that there's some yellow, so there's some other things like there's carotenoid in this, which is the orangey color and stuff. But I want to draw your attention to something that you see commonly, very common with oaks as the fall continues into winter. Because oaks are some of the trees too that a lot of times certain species just don't even drop their leaves until the summer or the winter starts to get towards the end and the new leaves start to come out. But I want you to see that some of these leaves are turning a very dark color. This one in particular right here that I just pulled off, you can see it's turning brown. You probably associate the brown color with oak trees. There's a reason. It's because it's full of tannins. Now there's iron, we mentioned about that before, because chlorophyll, to make chlorophyll, iron is very important, and iron like oxidizes and it sort of gets a rusty color. But tannins also really, really darken. And oaks have been used for centuries, since ancient times, for tanning leather, to get the dark color in leather because they will take the trunk of it and the leaves and things because it's so high in tannins. Now, if you were to take a leaf like this and chew into it, start chewing it up, it wouldn't hurt you. But if you chewed this thing up, it would be not a pleasant taste. Have you ever tried eating a green apple? I don't mean one that's like a Granny Smith. I'm talking about an apple during the summertime that is not quite ripe. And you pick an early apple like that, you bite into it, you know that texture, that taste, how much your lips want to pucker. That's from tannin. Tannin is also found in the fruits, and it gives you this. So fruits have this, and as the year goes on, the tannins are being replaced by the sugar as the fruit ripens. These trees, oaks, sumac, red grapes, like wine. Wine is full of tannins. People who drink wine, some people like the really dry wine. Why you have this dry taste to it, as they call it? That's the tannins. So the tannins give a flavor, but it's not a nice tasting flavor to many people, particularly if there's a lot of it. So what you see when you look at these leaves here, the tannins are in this all year long. The leaves are full of it. Matter of fact, the trunk of the tree, the branches of the tree even have a lot of tannin. An old Native American cure for sore throats was to take a knife and carve the bark off of an oak tree, and then you boil it in water, and then you gargle with it. You didn't want to drink it because it's so high in tannin that it's very bitter, like tasting to it, but it has this chemical, the tannin itself, actually can help inhibit bacteria, and so it helps to get over sore throats. Tannins are very important to plants. God put them in there for a purpose. They don't taste good in high concentrations whatsoever. And these trees have these, and many trees do have tannins in them. Many plants have tannins. And what they do is they protect. For one thing, we believe that they act as sunscreen for the leaf so it doesn't get too burned out from the sunlight during the summer. So it has a purpose there. Also, tannins, as I said, they sort of help prevent bacteria and viruses and fungi from infesting and infecting the plant and making the plant sick. It's a way that God protects these plants. He gave them this special molecule. You think they came up with this on their own? This is all perfectly balanced, it's all perfectly designed, and we see that this all taking place like this, the chlorophyll being protected by the tannins, the carotenoids, the xanthophylls are actually protecting and helping transfer sunlight energy to the chlorophyll A and B so they can make sugars and starches and oils and make oxygen. All this stuff is perfectly balanced. This is not something that happens by random chance. And these tannins are actually like an antiseptic, a preventive measure. And that's one reason you see leaves as they fall to the ground, and these will stay brown throughout the rest of the winter, and then coming into the fall, you'll see dead oak leaves and other leaves that have turned brown. Maples too do have tannins. We look at this maple right here. We pulled down this leaf, you can see it's got a brownish color. There's tannins in this also. Not as many as in oak. If you eat a maple leaf and taste it in the summertime as opposed to an oak tree, this would taste a little bit better to most people's standards because it's not as high in tannins, but they're there. And so tannins are a protection that God gave these plants to protect them from insects, fungi, bacteria, viruses, etc. And that's why you see this brown color. Yes, there's iron here too, because that's necessary for making chlorophyll. But the thing is, the tannins are what you normally see along the bottom, and as the summer, or as the winter proceeds and the leaves break down and stuff, then the tannins are actually being decomposed, broken down into the soil, and a lot of what you see then is the leftover rusty iron molecules from the iron chelates that's there. You know another plant that has pigments that we see commonly all around our house, but we never think much about it? Grass. Grass. Notice grass is green. We don't have red lawns. We don't have orange lawns. We don't have purple lawns. Actually, that would be sort of cool, wouldn't it? But no, we have green because primarily grass is a plant, and these blades of grass are loaded with chlorophyll A and B. And the thing is, they do have other pigments in them too. Here in the fall, you might notice in your yard, the grass, particularly if you live up north, the grass is slightly changing color. Some of it is turning sort of a brownish, almost totally non-color pigment to it at all, because the chlorophyll A and B, because of the temperatures and the climates and stuff, are decomposing. They're breaking down. And when they go, what's left over? Well, here we see some yellow. So there's xanthophyll, and there's some carotenoid, which are those yellowish orange colors. You do see that. So most people walk over this and they don't even think about it. But if you look carefully at your lawn at this time of year, maybe go outside if you can and take a look at your lawn, particularly if you live in the northern hemisphere, up in the Midwest in particular, where our ministry is located. You'll see that grass right now is turning from the beautiful dark green color. Now, some of it will stay. Of course, the snow will come and cover part of it and stuff like this. It won't turn totally this ugly color or just brown and yellow, but a lot of it is changing. And even grass shows that there's different pigments that God has put in these. And again, those carotenoids and xanthophylls help collect sunlight to give to the chlorophyll A and B so that they can make sugars and starch and feed themselves. How cool is that? As we're walking through the forest, we just stopped. There's a beautiful spruce tree, very, very tall spruce tree. Now, this is a tree. You can see the chlorophyll A and B. It is very prevalent in there. Yes, there's other pigments in this, but you can't see them because the chlorophyll A and B is being protected. What is it protected by? Well, part of it has to do with a very thick, waxy cuticle that waterproofs the leaves, which we'll show you when we get into the lab to see how these needles, the individual needles or leaves, how they're put together. But also there's chemicals in here that actually help prevent the chlorophyll from decomposing and breaking down. And these type of trees we call evergreens commonly, or this is a conifer, this is a spruce. They produce these also, and so it will stay green. So these are the ones you want to make a Christmas tree out of because they stay green for so long. And they'll produce the little cones and stuff and have their seeds and cones. But that's a spruce. A little different than the deciduous trees like we also see all around us and we've been looking at that lose their leaves. This is a cedar tree. Notice parts of it, it's doing some self-pruning here, you might say. It's starting to lose some of its dead leaves and stuff that have no longer function. But cedars, balsams, spruces and stuff, they stay evergreen. And they will stay like that throughout the winter months and stuff because their leaves are so different than what you see on an oak. And when we go back to the studio, we'll get out the microscope and we'll be able to explain a little bit more of why they're able to survive in the winter and the cold temperatures and stuff, how they can stay green where these deciduous plants, well, they change colors and the leaves fall. As you can tell, now we're in the studio. We've got our microscope out. And as I said, when we were out in the forest before and walking around looking at the different trees that were out there in different colors, that we're going to look at a part of these leaves under the microscope and explain a couple of questions as to the difference between like the spruce that we saw, evergreens, conifer trees, and the like maple trees and oaks and things like this. Why do these deciduous trees, the maples, the birch, the oaks, why did they lose their leaves in the wintertime? Why did God design this to happen? Well, when you look at a leaf, like here's a maple leaf, looking at a small maple leaf, it's very, very thin. And so because it's so thin, it is protected. God has designed these leaves to have a waxy covering on them. Now some, like plants that live closer to salt water on little islands and stuff, have a very, very thick waxy coating to keep the fresh water inside, because salt water will dehydrate the plant in many cases. So they have a very thick, what we call waxy cuticle. And maples like this one, on the surface, top surface of the leaf where the sun is hitting, it's got a really thick waxy cuticle. Underneath, where it's more of a pale color, it's not quite as thick. And we're going to see this under the microscope. But to help you understand what we're going to be looking at here, I've got a maple leaf already prepped on the stage of my microscope. It's on the microscope. What basically we're doing is we're going to take a section of that, and just like you see a leaf here, this leaf has been cut this way, making what's called like a transverse cut. Thus then, we're going to be looking at the thin inner section, and that's what we're going to see in here. And by looking at through the thin section, you're going to notice these leaves are really super thin, only a few cells thick. So let's take a look. This is a maple leaf that we have here under the microscope. This is at 40 magnification. Now, 40 magnification is the lowest power on this microscope. It's sometimes called a scanning lens because you get to see a whole lot of what's on the slide this way. The higher you go in magnification, you get into higher magnification, you see smaller section. It gets very tiny. So you get lost sometimes. If you are using a microscope at home and try this, you can do this yourselves. You can actually take with a very sharp knife or a razor blade, you can cut sections, make them as super thin as you can, put them on a glass slide, drop of water, put a cover slip over it, and you could try this yourself. Now, this slide that we have on here has been stained because some things just don't appear very well, and this is a preserved slide, so it had to be stained so it would retain the structures that we'll be talking about. So as we look at this slide here and looking at it, you can see over, if I just move the stage just a little bit, you'll see there's a big, large section here on the right that is one of the veins. So as we have leaves have veins in them, and this is a dicot, so they're not all parallel, they branch out in like a net shape. And so we see this very, very large vein. And if you've seen some of our other videos, we talk about the structure of a leaf. The inside, the very large cells on the inside are what we call xylem. They conduct the water and minerals. And then there's smaller cells along the outside of that, which are called phloem, that they move the sugars and the oils and carbohydrates. But that's where the vein is. I want to focus, though, on how thin this leaf is. So we're going to go in a little bit here, just in the section of the leaf. We're looking inside what the ancients could never really see, the inside of this factory that we call a leaf. So this is the inside of a leaf at 100 magnification. Now, what you're going to start to notice right away is there's a layer of flat cells going along the very top and a very thin layer at the very, very bottom, and then there's stuff in the middle. Underneath that top layer, there's columns of cells hanging down. These are called palisade. The palisade have little tiny red spheres in them, if you'll notice. You'll see this as we continue to get into higher magnification. These red spheres in a natural leaf like the one I cut at the beginning of this, these would be bright green because this is where chlorophyll is found. Chlorophyll A and B and things, that's where you find these little discs are called chloroplasts. And there's a bunch of them. You'll see there's a high concentration up on the surface, there are some down below as we'll see, but the higher concentrations at the surface. Do you know why? Yes. The surface of the leaf, it gets the most amount of sunlight. Thus, that's where you want the chlorophyll to get the energy from. Now here you can see this really, really displayed well. Now, what I want you to notice is the very, very top of this, the very extreme top, there is a layer of cells that are laying sort of flat, sort of oblong in shape, but they're laying flat. Some of them are sort of clear. They don't have much pigment. This is called the upper epidermis. So this is the top part of the leaf. But right above that, if you look carefully, you're going to see there's a pinkish layer. Now remember, this has been stained so that we can see it. It's on a preserved slide, so it won't decompose. It's been permanently stained and preserved this way. That thin layer you see, pinkish layer on the slide that you see there, normally this would be clear. You wouldn't be able to see this very well at all. It's the waxy cuticle. What's its purpose? It helps to hold the water inside the leaf. You go to get McDonald's or Burger King or Hardee's or a Wendy's drink at the soda fountain or a Culver's. Have you ever noticed you get it in a paper cup a lot of times? Well, water goes through paper pretty easily. How do they keep the water inside the cup from going through? They coat it with wax. We must have got this idea from studying God's creation of leaves, because leaves are set up the exact same way. They are waterproofed on the outside and the inside, these trees in the forest, with this waxy layer. And as I said, some plants that live close to salt water or are out in the deserts and stuff, they have to really struggle hard because there's a lot of sunlight coming down and possibly salt from the ocean splashing on them. They need a really, really good, strong waterproof basin to them, a protection layer. So their waxy cuticles can be thicker in certain places. Even you see this around in certain cattails and stuff would be thicker than what you would see on, say, grass in your garden. So that's what this is all about with that. Now, underneath that waxy layer is the upper epidermis. Then you see these columns hanging down. We said that's called the palisade. The palisade have these little discs. Now, I'm going to go to a higher magnification here. We're going to do something where I'm going to change this by going to what we call 1000 magnification, but it's an oil immersion lens. Now, most of you who have microscopes at home will probably not have this feature. It's a special lens that you see when you go up in power, you lose a lot of the light energy coming up. And this is a light microscope. It works by light passing through the specimen. That's why you can't put a rock or something on here. Light has to pass through it. So to help concentrate the light, to make it so that we don't lose it diffusing out, there's a special oil. It's called immersion oil. And I'm going to put a drop of this, a drop or two, right on the slide, right where we're going to be looking. And then I'm going to put this objective, that's the high power part of the microscope, right into this oil. Now, as we do this, I'm going to increase the light just a little bit because we lose some. But now you'll see that we're at a much higher magnification. And as I focus this, now you can see very easily these pink discs. These are chloroplasts. This is where God's little factories that he made for doing photosynthesis, this is where it takes place. Because normally these are green with chlorophyll A and B, and they have other pigments too, but this is the little green machines. They're so full, and the chlorophyll breaks down, so the plant is constantly keep having to make more and more of this, because chlorophyll, as we've said before, is a very unstable molecule. But you notice how concentrated they are in that palisade area. Look how many there are. Now, certain plants will have more than others. Carrots, spinach, very dark green. They have a lot of these, as opposed to something like, you know, a pale plant that you might have in your yard, like an ivy or something that's not quite as dark green, something that doesn't like as much sunlight and things. As we move down in this, we come to an area that's, the cells are not organized as much. This is called the spongy layer. This is where gas is exchanged. Remember, in photosynthesis, the plant is taking water and carbon dioxide, utilizing the sunlight through chemical processes, enzymes, and different chemicals and proteins to manufacture sugars and oxygen. The oxygen comes out of the leaf through little holes in the leaf. This is where the exchange of the gas takes place. And so it takes place in this spongy layer. Then if you keep going down, we come to the very bottom of the leaf. And what we see right here in the center are two little blue cells. And you'll notice that they have a little coloration to them. Their shape is different than the ones on the bottom, to the left and to the right. These two are sort of like forming a little pocket. And what they are, these are called guard cells. And what they do is they open up and close. Two cells will open up and close, and they allow the gases to escape or to enter through. Those are the things, the guard. It's like having the guard at the gate. They're allowing certain things to go in and out. That's what those are. The little hole that forms there is called a stoma or stomata, and that is where the hole is. It's just a hole, that's all it is. The guard cells open up, make the hole. And they're controlled by how much water is in the leaf itself. So if it's more water, they swell up and things. And so they are all controlled by a hydraulic system, or actually it's called a osmotic system of controlling how much water molecules are in there. And they all operate. This is amazing how this factory is all set up to do this. It is amazing that people will look at a leaf like this and say, oh, this happened by random chance. This is just a design that happened on its own. It was just molecules coming together. Oh no, you can see a plan. No factory in any city or in any suburb or anything just formed by spontaneous combustion and just formed and perfectly had laid out lines and assembly lines and machinery and gears, everything perfectly in place. This is a leaf. It's showing the structure of God, his handiwork here. Now, as I said, one of the things that I talked about when I was out in the field with you as to why these type of leaves, like a maple leaf, maples, as you can see, this one here has changed color. This one is a beautiful reddish color, looks really nice on my white lab coat here, and has a lot of sugar in here. This is bright red, meaning that it has the pigments that form the red color, anthophylls, and these things there was a lot of sugar in here. As sunlight hit this, it turned bright red, and that's why it's this color. But it's so thin. They're so thin. And they have a waxy covering, but the waxy covering, as we saw on here, and if I take a look, let's take a look again at the waxy covering up on top. You see how thin that is. This is at 1,000 magnification. This is so thin. This is thinner than a hair, a human hair. That's how thin this waxy layer is. Now, in the wintertime, the humidity drops. And so water would be pulled, since the air is having less water vapor in it, molecules go to where, from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. So what would happen if they kept their leaves, for when they'd freeze, but what would happen is the water would actually be drawn out of the plant. If you remove too much water from a plant, obviously it loses what we call Tuger pressure, but it can kill the plant. Definitely not be helpful for it. And so God has designed these that at certain times of the year, when it starts getting cool, the change of the weather is happening, cork will form where the leaf was attached, sealing off the leaf. Any sugars that's still inside here turn this beautiful bright red. The chlorophyll A and B start to disappear. They start to break down. Then you start to see the xanthophyll and the carotenoids, the yellows, the orange. You can see the tannins, the brownish colors like in oaks and things. You start to see that because the chlorophyll A is not there. But God is doing this to protect the leaf. It would lose its water if it wasn't for this waxy cuticle. So that's why this waxy cuticle is so important, to keep the water. Otherwise, if it didn't have it, or even if it kept just this little waxy thing as the water vapor in the wintertime and the weather changes, it would kill the plant. So that's why deciduous trees, primarily, there's other reasons, but that's a major reason why they lose their leaves. Now, we're gonna switch here. We're gonna go back to a different leaf. I told you we would take a look at like a spruce or a pine needle or something. So I've got a pine needle. Same thing, we took the pine needle, it's been sliced, it's been permanently preserved, and we're gonna put this under the microscope now and let you see the difference between a pine and this deciduous maple leaf we just got done looking at. This is a pine needle or a pine leaf. The leaves, as we said, out in the forest, the leaves are actually needle shaped. Notice how the shape is so different. In evergreens, conifers, things like that, they are much thicker. Notice how thick this needle is, this leaf is. There's two of them here. In fact, what you're looking at are two separate needles, but you can see each one is so thick and so shaped differently. Some are totally square. Some are diamond shaped, but they're very, very thick. Very, very thick compared to like what we saw with the maple. Remember, maples are thin, they're gonna lose water. These are very thick. They are designed to be able to hold the water even though the environment outside, the water vapor in the air outside is very low. They do not lose their water very easily because they are so well designed. I just want you to notice first how thick these are. And again, this slide has been permanently stained so that you can see certain features. And we're gonna take a look at this at higher magnification and let you see how cool this is. Take a look at this. Now the problem we're gonna have here is, even though it's a skinny little pine needle, these are big. They're much thicker. And because they're so much thicker, we can't even see the whole slide, or a whole specimen basically, on the camera right now. But what you're gonna notice, Look at the epidermis. Now, when I say epidermis, just like your skin is your epidermis, your outer covering, these leaves have an epidermis also. Notice how thick it is and how many like layers of cells you're going to start to notice. Then you have the column cells underneath the epidermis like we saw with the others, and inside are very, very dark discs. Those dark discs are the chloroplasts. And so you start to see that there's some similar structure to it, but these are different. And then on the inside, there's a whole lot of storage area and xylem and phloem. It's the vein. There's a vein that goes through the center, and that's what we're looking at here. There's xylem in the phloem. Xylem is bigger. Phloem is more compressed and smaller in size. But as we take a look at this, we're going to go to a higher magnification, and you're going to see some. This is so cool. You're going to see some really interesting things with this. This is at 400 magnification now. Let's focus this in. Oh my gosh, we're in the middle of the needle. We're in the vein of the needle, of the leaf itself. So we're going to move outward a little bit. Oh, look at this now. You can see on the outside, on the extreme left of your vision, there's this pinkish color. That is the waxy covering. But notice that this epidermis is at least 3 cells thick. 3 cells. The oak, the maples and stuff only have 1 cell thickness underneath that waxy covering. These have 3 cells to help protect it. And notice how thick their cell walls are, how they're protected. And so they have a very, very thick coating on them. Next, you have the columns going across here and they're all clustered together, these little chloroplasts, which would be bright green. And you can see these and being bright green and stuff. And so that's where the photosynthesis is taking place. Then you have another big layer of cells underneath that. Then you get into, oh, here's the xylem and the phloem. Right in the center, you're going to see some big pink like cells with big holes in them. They're just like empty cells. Those are xylems. The ones that are purplish in color, bluish purple, they're smaller in size. They have a dark nucleus. Those are the phloem. They move the sugars and stuff. But you can see how this is all set up. It's very different than what you saw with the maple. I want to keep going across and show you something here. Oh, look at this. Looks like a beak of a bird or something, doesn't it? Like teeth or something, a mouth. These are guard cells. This cell, this leaf here, this needle, when it was put like this and sliced and preserved and stained, the guard cell is open. You can see how air moves in and out of the needle. And these are cells that would be closed up and then they open up to release the gases or allow moisture and stuff in. That's the guard cells. But again, the guard cell is on the underside, basically, of the needle or the leaf. Again, look at how thick that epidermis is. Why is the epidermis so thick? To hold the water inside the leaf. So in the wintertime, when the humidity is low, the water vapor in the air is low, the leaf would tend to just, the water to come out of the leaf. But God has designed these with these little automated little cells, guard cells, to open and close, to keep water in there, to regulate it. And also, this prevents the water from leaving and dehydrating the plant. As I said out in the field, when we were talking about these also, there's other chemicals that are in here. Some conifers actually produce a chemical called ethylene glycol, which is very similar to antifreeze, so that the tree does not freeze solid and turn to ice crystals, which could break things up. And there's other chemicals that God has designed to do this. I mean, isn't this brilliant? Isn't this showing a tremendous design, these factories, and how this is all put together? It just boggles my mind that people can look through a microscope and not see these factories and how well they're designed. It's amazing. And if there's a design, there's a designer. This is evidence to me that there is a God. This does not show random fluctuations whatsoever. Everything is so organized and balanced down to the molecular level, down to the molecules. Shows us how cool God is. I thank God that he gave me the eyes of a biologist, that I can see his handiwork in this. This is so cool. But that's why you see the difference between evergreen trees, which can hold the water because of all the insulation basically that they have and chemicals to help them, as opposed to a maple, a leaf, an elm, An oak, they have to lose their leaves or they lose too much water and can damage the plant. We've been looking at a lot of things. We've looked at parts of leaves under microscopes. We've walked through the forest, trudging through the forest, looking at different colors of leaves, different type of trees, maples, oaks, all different sorts of trees. But as I said, and one thing about our ministry, we always tie somehow everything that we learn back to God, because God is the creator of nature. He created all of this. He designed all this. He planned everything out. And we see this. God has these deciduous trees that lose their leaves. They do this as He's designed them to stay alive through the winter. Throughout the summer, the chlorophyll A and B is putting a lot of sugars and starches down into the stems and into the roots, so that when the winter comes and the leaves are gone, they can no longer manufacture any food. But they've got it stored up, and it's stored there, and it keeps them alive. Then when the spring comes, the sap starts to run and it changes. They go through a transformation, and the transformation, it looks like they're dying, looks like death. The tree is going through, in a couple of weeks, these trees will be totally barren of their leaves, and it'll look so dead. But then, in the spring, it all comes back to life. What was put into the earth is now giving life to the tree. It is so amazing. The sugars will start to run back up. They'll change from starch to sugar, run up through. Many people will tap the maple trees to get the sugars, or the birch trees to get the sugary sap out to make maple syrup and birch syrup. But the life is flowing back into this, and it's getting life. But there was a transformation, you understand, that took place. God is all into transformation. I don't know what you're going through in your life. I don't know what difficulties you're having. Living in this world today, we all, Christians, non-Christians, everybody goes through difficult times. But the thing is, God is still in control of everything. Just look at nature. You can see His control of everything. Even if a forest fire comes by and wipes everything out, soon plants start growing back. God transforms things in nature. He can transform you. In the book of Romans, Paul wrote to the Romans in chapter 12, after explaining about salvation, after explaining how Jesus Christ died to take away our sins, and if we accept Him, we can have eternal life and be in a personal relationship with God again. And He puts His Spirit inside of us. And then Paul tells us in chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Now stop there. You notice it said sacrifice. Sacrifice deals with death. We are to sacrifice. In the Old Testament days, they sacrificed animals. Today, we want to sacrifice, and God's calling for us to sacrifice our lives for Him. Jesus made this very clear when He was talking to His disciples and followers. You have to be willing to sacrifice to be in my disciples, to be my apostles. You have to sacrifice. But the thing is, it doesn't end there. Look how this continues in verse 2. Do not be conformed to this world. Yeah. But be transformed by the renewal of your mind. Do you get that? Being transformed. God is into transformation. You know what that word is in the Greek? It's metamorpho. Yes, where we get the word metamorphosis. Same thing, which means to change. God is wanting to change us. He puts His Spirit inside of us, and it changes not just our sinful condition, where God now sees us as pure and holy as He sees His own Son, but the thing is, He puts His Spirit inside of us, and His Holy Spirit starts to work and transform our minds to be more and more God-like. And that's what Paul is telling us that we're supposed to do. It's not a suggestion. It's not if you have time. It's not something you do just on Sunday. It's something we're supposed to do, to be transformed by the renewal of our minds. And how do we do that? Let's get into the Word, study the Word of God, because He wants you to be transformed to be more like His Son. That's what we can learn from all the transformation we're seeing here and the changes going on with all these leaves. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson, and I hope you'll come back with some other lessons that we have on Creation Clues, and check out our other videos and podcasts on our website. So until we meet again, take care, and may God bless.
Support the show. Become a donor at evidenceforfaith.org/give.